South Africa today is a country riding high on optimism and promise for the future. A country in the midst of change, as it was in the early 19th century, when the Board of Executors was founded as a trust company that managed its clients' funds through times of uncertainty and instability, as it does today. During the turbulent years when slavery was abolished in the Cape, trekkers were moving north in great numbers and British settlers were arriving as a counterbalance to this exodus, the Board of Executors was established by a group of concerned businessmen. From those early days, and through many periods of uncertainty, the Board of Executors has grown to become one of the most respected and highly rated independent financial services groups in the country, offering a select range of professional services to corporate and private clients. Today, the Board of Executors is the oldest company listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. It is a company run by highly committed individuals who are shareholders in the business. This professional partnership, backed by the technical resources of a modern financial services group, has an annual compound growth rate over the last 10 years of 28%. Its unit trust, fund management and merchant banking divisions have established themselves as top performers in the market. In fact, through all its services and for all its clients and shareholders, the Board of Executors is committed to continually building the foundations for future growth. And as South Africa moves into an era of challenge and new opportunities for all its people, the Board of Executors is proud to be associated with the ideals of Education Africa and as a sponsor to the furtherance of its noble objectives.
And though assumedly the Almighty created the world, it was latter-day man who deemed to split it into two. First world and third, almost ordaining in the process that each would look at the other through different eyes. First world and third. First world and third. Though here in South Africa, frictionally and factionally, they now coexist in one world. Or rather, in two worlds, seeking to unite. Different worlds will look at what you're seeing with different eyes. First world eyes will see the legacy of apartheid, manifested especially in the inequality of educational resources, black versus white.
And we can read a bit if you go there on page.
Third world eyes will gape in amazement at what does exist, at the numbers who are being taught.
Number 8. Again. Right.
But, sadly, millions have escaped and are still escaping the education net. And though literacy levels in South Africa are the highest in Africa, for too many, it is too late.
Say some 20 minutes or so and see what will happen. If it remains along the 0 line,
In the grand old days of apartheid, the 50s and 60s, consensus among many white South Africans was that black South Africans were genetically incapable of learning more than basics.
All right, can you draw what you see in this one?
And were especially incapable of learning scientific skills, let alone teaching them.
A dynamic condition which is in your body.
Then, it was almost unthinkable that an institution such as the Giyani Science Centre, located in the rural northeast of South Africa, could exist, let alone succeed in turning out high school graduates totally immersed in scientific skills. The Science Centre's educational outreach extends far beyond lecture theatres and laboratories to remote rural villages deep in the bushveld. Giyani Science Centre is a unique educational initiative, tackling the problems of skills acquisition and quality education now, a vital arena where South Africa's future destiny as a developed nation hangs in the balance.
My name is Walter Sisulu, Deputy President of the African National Congress. I attach great importance on the question of education. It is one of the top issues or burning question in the country.
It seems to me, without education, for the majority of the people in this country, the possibility of having stability in future is very, very slim.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Despite the government spending to the limit of its resources, the bitter legacy of apartheid, or separate development, has left its mark in the tremendous inequality of education in South Africa, white at the expense of black, in terms of infrastructure, staffing, and facilities. In the rural areas, overcrowding and chronic lack of facilities make education an uphill battle. But the will is there.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
In the burgeoning squatter communities springing up around the major cities, the conditions are pitiful. And yet, despite the deprivation, the thirst for knowledge is unquenchable. And even in the midst of the chaos and lawlessness of urban black township schools, simmering with frustration and discontent, the will to learn is there too. Though so-called white government schools were open to all to a limited extent in 1991, it's almost too late. The tragedy is, it should have happened sooner. Now, it's a race against time.
One can, of course, repeal laws that are racially discriminatory with the stroke of a pen. And that is exactly what State President de Klerk has done over the last 18 months or so. But what you cannot obliterate with the stroke of a pen is the legacy of 40 years of apartheid. And that is what we have got to deal with. And that is why it is extremely urgent for us to get on with the job of rescuing children, a whole generation of children who have been really functionally disabled by not having a decent education.
We have an education crisis. There are children out there, thousands of them, who are crying out for an education. Our political leaders are locked in negotiations at the moment. They do not have the time, they will not have the time in the immediate future to look into this education crisis. And unless the private sector gets into it and does something. We need to generate funds locally and overseas to start working and to try and solve the education problem.
Clearly, an independent accelerator to propel quality education in Africa is needed. And ironically, it exists in the shape of a unique project involving what could be termed the most elitist institutions, namely the country's top independent private schools.
Every man should be entitled to an equal education. Why should we sit here in luxury in one room while our fellow countrymen sit 220 in a room with no windows?
Well, education is vital, and it has been a fact that too few people have been receiving a decent education, and it's time that everyone got a good shot at an education.
For too long now, the government has manipulated our way of thinking through education. The time is right for an independent, non-biased, relevant education for all Africans.
Well, I feel very privileged to be at this school, very much. But then I also feel that that privilege is very wrong, because my brothers and sisters should be getting the same privilege that I'm getting right now.
I think in South Africa that for too long South Africans have been cut off from each other. We don't know what's happening to anyone else in the country. And we need to integrate with each other. We need to give to each other, take from each other, and learn together.
The concept is simple. Each of the great private schools in South Africa aligns itself to a developing Education Africa school. Then, simply, existing transferable resources like teaching, plus existing expertise in school management, is shared. Already we have classrooms theoretically filled with pupils. Pupils whose parents will pay our asking fee of 4,000 rands a year, about $1,400 US, despite whatever hardship they'll endure by doing so. These pupils will be in classrooms learning until mid-afternoon. Then, children of parents who can afford less than, in overseas money, say $50 a year, they will enter the classrooms to learn, simply because we have the facilities in hand.
You all understand? So what must we do to trees? We must look after the trees in the roots. So the water goes round and round.
What is the word for this?
Thereafter, in the evening, adults will enter to learn the things that apartheid denied them.
Bed. Let's go through it again.
One of the things about Education Africa that I like very much is the fact that you're not only going to help privileged children who have obtained bursaries or have got parents who can afford to send them to an expensive school, but also you are going to use those facilities after hours for less privileged children, those in the community, in the neighborhood, presumably, and also those not in the neighborhood, those who can be brought in to the schools when they are not being used for ordinary academic hours. And better still, to my mind, is the use of those facilities in the evenings for literacy classes, adult literacy classes, and to improve the general educational standard of adult blacks.
It is also, in a very curious way, in business terms, very clever, because it doesn't reinvent the wheel. It uses the excellent material which is there on one hand from, say, good schools, and tries to, in a way, to redistribute, which is a clever thing to do, to those who had been denied these opportunities.
Education Africa is concerned with providing quality education to produce those people that we need to run a successful new South Africa. We need the engineers, we need the lawyers, and we need quality teachers. And if we are going to produce that type of person, we need to harness financial resources, both locally and overseas, because our government, the bit of money that they are providing is going to go towards mass education. and they will not have the funds available to provide that quality education that Education Africa is talking about.
The eternal value of projects like Education Africa is that they set standards. They prove what can be done. They demonstrate how high the potential is of the pupil body we have available. Because they set the standard, they will sooner or later force the state's institutions to come up to that standard also.
I think that a project like Education Africa is of absolutely prime importance, not only for South Africa, and not only for Southern Africa, but really for the whole continent. Because more and more there will be interaction on the continent. Without true literacy, without technological understanding, you really will not be able to make our country and the surrounding countries livable.
I really fully endorse the Education Africa project because I believe that it's needed, and I don't think that we are going to get anywhere without that kind of assistance which this fund is going to provide for our people.
Well, we welcome the projects like Education Africa because we are very much concerned, as I've already said, we are in a crisis. And we naturally must welcome efforts such as you are making in your project.
Education. It makes people easy to lead, but difficult to drive. Easy to govern, but impossible to enslave. Today's child, tomorrow's hope. Education Africa.